Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Information Security Made Easy, Best Practices to Enhance Your Processes and Practices. I'm Teresa Resick, the Director in the AIM Market Intelligence Group, and AIM is your host and producer of today's event. And with me today are AIM board member Greg Reed, and we also have Ian Carlson from AccuSoft. And AccuSoft is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar. By joining the webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. And across the bottom of your screen is a list of all the widgets that we have available for you. And Group Chat is one of those widgets, and just click that open, and with Group Chat, you'll be able to text to chat with each other and also with a few of us here at AIM. So I encourage you to open that up and join the conversation. Do ask questions of the speakers throughout the hour using the Q&A feature, and we will hold these questions until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. But you can also use that feature to ask for technical assistance. And you can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resources list that's to the right of the slide area. There's also a few other documents and links in there that are there to help you learn more about today's topic. So just click in that resources section at any time, and it will open in a new browser tab for you, and then you can save and read that document after the webinar. And at the end of the webinar, a brief survey will open on your browser, and it's also in the widgets below in the slide area. And we appreciate it if you would take a few moments to offer your feedback and to suggest other topics for us to cover. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And now I'd like to introduce the two speakers that we have with us today. Pleased to introduce Gregory Reed, who is the CEO of InFuture. And Greg has an extensive background in implementing information management systems across the U.S., the Asia Pacific, and Europe. He is also certified in U.S. and EU privacy regulations and in the International Privacy Program implementations. Greg's primary industry focus is in the global pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry. And then we also have with us Ian Carlson, and he is a member of the marketing leadership team at AccuSoft, specializing in customer relationship management. He has an extensive background in building lasting business relationships and leverages this client-based perspective in helping organizations address their unique needs. He understands every customer is different and takes time to get to know the individual, what business challenges they're looking to address, and how AccuSoft can help them get there. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Greg Reed to begin our talk today. Greg?
Thank you, Teresa. I really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody joining us, and I appreciate AccuSoft for underwriting this. Thank you very much. To everyone, I'm a board member of AIM, a proud board member. AIM's a great resource for your information management and information governance needs. Today we're going to talk about the supporting of global privacy and data protection obligations, and on slide 6, Teresa, using advanced information management capabilities. The thing about privacy, and I do a lot of privacy, in fact, most of my work these days is around GDPR. I'm sure many of you have heard of that. It's the EU privacy regulation that's going online in a few weeks, and many companies are obligated to it in the United States as well. But all privacy obligations, statutes, regulations that are out there really have two primary enablers. That's information management and information governance. And so while we're held to the laws and we're held to the regulation, how we are successful around privacy, GDPR, HIPAA, whatever it might be, it's around information management and information governance. And the good news about all of that is that information management and information governance have been solved. And they've been solved for decades. And there's great software providers like AccuSoft and many others out there that help companies create an enabled environment around privacy. So Teresa, if you go on to slide 7. So what makes today's privacy and regulatory environment complex really is that any given company, many of those that are on this call from my understanding, may be held to more than one privacy regulation. So we, under the industry side, we may have HIPAA and the high tech, which follow healthcare industries. We may have the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which is financial, and of course the FERCRA, the Federal Credit Reporting Act. There are certain federal privacy laws and regulations, COPA, CAN-SPAM, et cetera, that most companies are obligated to in the United States. And I'm from Massachusetts, and Massachusetts has its own security laws around data and private PI information. California does as well. Even if you're not covered under a specific obligation, a privacy obligation, the Federal Trade Commission can enforce against companies for specific acts about unfair trade practices, and they often do when companies mishandle private information of their customers. And of course, we have other countries and regions, which are the GDPR, Canada, and PIPEDA, which is part of the Canadian privacy law, and the Chinese laws. So how do we enable a company to be successful across multiple privacy regulations that are out there? Really, a key requirement is to have a common set of tools and capabilities that support more than one regulation. We can't choose one software package per regulation. That's very difficult to implement. So we want a common set of tools. The GDPR states it very well: privacy by design and privacy by default as a component of the software environment. And to also remember that as part of our obligations, the EU, as well as many of the U.S. Regulatory bodies, rigorously enforce privacy. So it's something to take seriously, and software is a big enabler of that. Ian, can you talk a little bit, or are your customers facing privacy issues or challenges in your world?
Absolutely, Greg. We work with a variety of organizations across financial, government, insurance, and private sector, just to name a few. And given the fact that there's often many pieces to the compliance puzzle, our API and software development toolkit portfolio really helps contribute to the successful practice of these compliance requirements. So absolutely, it's something we see and hear and talk about every day.
Oh, okay, super. And that leads into our next slide. Teresa, if you flip to slide 8. Privacy deeply impacts the software development and selection cycle. So if we look at an example, SDLC, software development lifecycle, in front of us, which is very similar to a purchase of a software system as well, where I've seen my clients, unfortunately, they're having issues right now with privacy, is they've chosen a package, or they're starting to develop their system, and now they're thinking about privacy. But where I have the knot here, we got to back up to where it begins. When you think about the needs of the system itself, the discussion about privacy requirements, like any other functional and technical requirement, start at the beginning. So Ian, can you talk a little bit about your AccuSoft environment and how it might support privacy in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So when someone first starts down the road of considering, evaluating, or at least verbalizing the thought of implementing a new solution, there's so many things that go into, and often many different requirements. Obviously, users within an organization, departments often require different features and functionality, and ultimately have different needs. So our toolkits help with things like redaction, watermarking. We give you the embedded custom text and image watermarks to your documents, and they're non-removable watermarks that really prevent unauthorized copying of shared documents. So early on in the process, our engineers really help organizations and people evaluate solutions based upon their needs and how we may fit into the larger project. At the end of the day, we understand the importance of scoping the project early, and often, the needs that go along with it that are sometimes overlooked.
Okay, thank you very much. Teresa, would you go to slide 9, please? I apologize to everybody for saying that. I am looking at pieces of paper, so I don't have a computer in front of me. So when I talk to my clients, we're on slide 9, there are 9 common elements. I've added number 9 because that was not part of the original list from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s. There were 8 common principles that are common across all privacy regulations around the world, and they're called the Fundamental Information Practice Principles. Those are labeled 1 through 8, and I added number 9 because we're seeing that in pretty much every privacy law these days. But almost every privacy law, I don't care if it's HIPAA, FERCRA, GDPR, I don't care if it's the Canadian laws, whatever it might be, member state laws in the EU, These common principles go across all of the laws and regulations, for the most part, that are out there around the world. So when I talk to my clients, how do we attack this privacy area when you got multiple different regulations? I say, well, let's not look at it from what every regulation requires. Let's look at the common principles that are out there. And the FIPS, as they're called, are a good list to start with around both technical and functional requirements associated with privacy laws globally. So first of all, there's individual access. People need to have access to their data, and that's part of HIPAA, that's part of GDPR, and many others as well. They have a choice of what you do with that data. So they can tell you, and especially under the GDPR, how to process data or not process it. You have to tell them what you're going to do with their data, and you have to be very transparent with it. So GDPR, HIPAA, FERCRA, all these require a privacy notice to say to the user, the data subject, and the GDPR, what are we doing with your data? So it's very transparent as to what the company is accomplishing with the data. What can we collect, use, and disclose? So we can't collect more than we need to as a business in order to process that data in support of the business. We can't gather more information that's necessary for our needs as a business. Again, we have to be transparent under number 3, what we're doing with that data. And of course, especially under HIPAA, if there is an incorrect piece of data element, we are obligated as a business to correct and rectify that on behalf of the data subject or the patient. Keeping the data up to date with integrity is also part of that. Safeguards, we're going to talk quite a bit about that coming forward here in a moment. Accountability, in other words, governance. Remember I said information governance in the beginning. And then breach notifications and obligations around that. 3 days under the GDPR, 60 days under HIPAA in some circumstances. So these are the common practice principles that when we talk privacy laws, these are common across every law pretty much around the world. And that's where we start when we start with our clients, is this. Now, what do you need from software and enablers as part of this? You need very flexible and capable software systems to meet most of these elements on the left. We have to have enhanced data and information security. That is an obligation, a very strong obligation under HIPAA, GDPR, FERCRA, whatever privacy law we look at, that is definitely part of that obligation to secure the data. And also, we have to have a software package that manages multiple different types of complex data. We don't want a one-to-one relationship. We can't have one software package that just does one type of data. That opens up a lot of different insecure channels into the data, and it goes against our secure requirements for data tracking. And speaking of tracking, having strong user tracking. If a breach occurs, we are obligated to investigate and rectify that breach, and the only way we're going to know a breach occurs is by having strong tracking and being able to rectify, knowing where the holes are to be able to plug those holes. And data minimization, which is a big part of HIPAA, it's a big part of GDPR and many other laws, we only capture what we need. We don't have it expand out across multiple share drives, SharePoint, Box, Dropbox, and the list goes on. We minimize the location of the data and the data that we hold. Ian, any comments on that before we move on?
Yeah, absolutely. So via our toolkits, we provide end users the ability to view multiple file formats, ability to restrict access at numerous points, either at viewing, downloading, printing. As I mentioned earlier, the burned-in redactions. They can be used in multiple variations and combinations. For example, you can scan sensitive documents, redact information, and of course allow viewing access. One of our toolkits in particular, Image Gear, it allows you to really quickly integrate document handling functions including image conversion, creation, editing, annotations, viewing, scanning, and printing into your application. So, for example, banking usage often involves loan applications. So we've got a variety of different financial institutions, banking institutions that are processing these types of applications via Image Gear, then routing the appropriate pages to the employees who need to process them. These employees then view their pages via another one of our toolkits, Prism Doc. And any information that is sensitive, personal information, it can be programmatically redacted before the document reaches the user, ultimately giving those that initiate that process the control over who gets to see what and when at what point of the process.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Teresa, could you go on to slide 10? So when you look at privacy obligations, there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are met by the business administration side, business process side, governance, which is part of a compliance objective. And so just as an aside, if you want to do privacy well in your organization, go look up the 7 steps of compliance. It's put up by the OIG. It's mandated by the OIG for certain healthcare companies and groups. It's called the 7 steps of compliance. You can Google that. And right there, if you switch healthcare over to privacy, you've got pretty much all the 7 steps that you need to do to be compliant around privacy. So that's just a little tidbit that I help my clients with as they think about what do we need to do to be successful. So we look at these 4 different areas that software environments can help address privacy obligations. First of all, we want to consolidate functionality into a single package environment, whatever we want to call that, because if we don't do that, if we have a data repository, a data lake, whatever it might be, and it's filled with PI, data subject information, data concerning health, my clients who are biotechs and all that with clinical trial information, the last thing we want is about 25 or 30 different individual software packages hitting that at the same time, because it's very hard to control the security. Anybody that's in IT knows the more packages you have, the more likelihood somebody's going to breach or have an access point that they shouldn't have. So we want to simplify the access controls and reduce the number of access points. And if there is a breach, we can quickly pinpoint any misuse. The more packages that we have, the less likely we're going to find a problem quickly, at least. And so viewing and accessing and converting numerous file types within a single package, I know the AccuSoft tool sets do that. So instead of having to buy 12 different packages, you have one package that does a number of different file types, and then collaborating and sharing information and updates amongst the parties without leaving an individual secure environment. And I'd like Ian to talk about that in a second. And then annotating documents without using additional software packages. So minimization. I'm a technologist. I love technology. I've been doing it for 25 years globally. But what I've learned is the less technology, the better. And when it comes to privacy, that is absolutely true. The fewer packages, the better. Going into number 2 here, the access requirements that we had, individual access requirements we had in our FIPS list that was the slide before this, we have to be able to find data quickly of people if they ask for it. Under GDPR, companies are obligated to let people know what they have about them and at times erase that data and so on, all the fun requirements under the GDPR. And using metadata and strong search capabilities of packages like AccuSoft allow that functionality to occur. If you can't tag your data, if you can't search your data, you're not able to meet those GDPR and HIPAA and other privacy obligations around individual access. Ian, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so you said something that got me thinking. We work with a variety of insurance companies that are using a combination of our toolkits as part of their security efforts. So they receive documents from adjusters or, even other companies outside of the insurance company's secure infrastructure using forms processing, like one of our toolkits, Form Suite, to scan the documents into the system. PrismDoc, as I mentioned earlier, that conversion API can be set up so that the document passed through by PrismDoc is scrubbed free of any scripts or really even any outside threats. This ultimately allows the insurance company to ensure that they are compliant with the SLA that they ultimately promised to their customers and stakeholders with, in terms of securing data. And
okay, excellent.
And by having the luxury and ability to mark up a document without leaving an application and having to pass through email, being downloaded, printed, and things like that, it really gives that user ultimate control over it.
That's excellent. Thank you, Ian. Going on to slide 11, Teresa. The last 2 areas that software can really help companies enable their privacy or support their privacy obligations, whatever privacy statute regulation that you might be under, is really keeping data secure using software safeguards. So number 3, you're looking at pseudonymization. Now that's a very big word. I didn't know what that was about 3 years ago, but before reading the Data Protection Directive from 1995 in the EU, and that's a big part of the GDPR. All it really means is redaction blinded. So if you're in the clinical trials area, it's blinded data. People call it redaction. They call it pseudonymization in the GDPR, but really hiding the person's name and enough information about them and being able to look it up somewhere else, if that data is breached, that really helps the data remain secure if you don't have their names associated with it, for example. So to be able to remove that and to that information easily and to redact that information or pseudonymization under the GDPR. What also you want to look for in a package is the ability to not regularly print documents in order to sign them off, in order to pass them around, whatever it might be. So you want some good workflow. You want the ability to do electronic signatures and all of the other functional needs without taking an electronic copy and moving it to paper, because that just increases a breach point. All right, so we want to remove that that need to print by keeping it electronic. And of course, watermarking documents is important because that reminds the users of their obligations, whether it says private, confidential, what have you, of owning that document and making sure that they, as the user within the company, are reminded of their obligation to that document. And going on to number 4, ensuring the data quality and accuracy of the information, being able to compare different versions. So part of the FIPS and part of the GDPR, part of HIPAA, part of FERCRA, all of these privacy laws, data quality and integrity. And part of that is meaning to making sure that you have the right version of data and using the right version of the data for whatever the data subject's processing is going on. So in other words, if you're a healthcare provider, you're a covered entity, you want to make sure you're using the right version of the medical record in order to treat the patient. Having old stuff doesn't make sense, and it can be actually quite dangerous. And so part of the data quality and integrity obligation under all these laws is making sure that we keep that information up to date as much as that is needed. And of course, if you want to create a final copy, the ability to create a PDF archive version of the data and store that as needed, and then it's stored long term. Ian, anything you'd like to add to that?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. Versioning is crucial. Being able to provide an audit trail of the life cycle of a document, even contracts. I speak with organizations all the time that unfortunately execute on the wrong contract at times because they're uploading, downloading, mail merge, sharing documents, and they're, at the end of the day, they've got 20 different documents, and they're like, hey, which one's the final one? So being able to track each and every version, who's done what, when, and ultimately giving individuals the ability to do digital legally binding e-signatures really, is a game changer because you're able to interact with the appropriate document, contract, whatever, and interact in it within a way that you've been requested to do so.
Awesome. Excellent. So going on to slide 12, Teresa, if you wouldn't mind, there are clinical trials. I'm a biotech guy, and there is nothing more complex in the world when it comes to data subject information than clinical trials, as far as I'm concerned. I've been in almost every industry, and when it comes to the sensitivity of the data, especially around the health of a person if they're sick, how the data is transported around the world, and how many people it's transported to for analysis, clinical trials are the pentultimate of complexity and difficulty from what I've seen. And I know you got an example you'd like to share with us.
Yeah, we've discussed a few of them. One more that comes to mind. So clinical trials have to adhere to the right to access patient records across the continuum of the healthcare, really. We have companies looking to Prism Doc's HTML5 web-based viewer to allow for the sharing of patient records in a secure format and only by authorized users. Our other imaging software development toolkits allow for multiple image files such as DICOM to be viewed, compressed, or converted without losing any integrity of the image. Then you can pair with Prism Doc, which really doesn't allow for any alteration of the original file, ultimately maintaining the security of the record.
Awesome. Excellent. So we're going to go into some recommendations. We're running out of time, and I want to go through a few points, and Ian's going to follow up with the last point. Teresa, we go into slide 13, recommendations. Here's the most important part about privacy laws. know what you're obligated to and know what you're not obligated to. So there's a multiple intersection we talked about of industries, states, U.S., federal, GDPR if you have to operate in Europe. Let me tell you, you got to find a good privacy person to tell you what you need to do and what you don't need to do. And even under, like, for example, the GDPR, I've got clients who are running clinical trials. This is about an hour-long discussion. I'm going to do it in 15 seconds. They fear that a clinical trial patient can force the removal of their data due to right to erasure under the GDPR. And actually, they shouldn't fear that because there's many derogations under the GDPR. So don't let all the hype get you too concerned, okay? There's nothing in the GDPR that is onerous, that hasn't been out there already. They just made it a little bit more explicit. And so understand your derogations, fancy word for exceptions, understand what you're obligated to, and then take action. Don't get a good privacy person because really that's kind of a niche area, especially when it comes to GDPR being so new. So you want to adapt the automation of the information data governance practices and process workflows so that you're in compliance with this. So you have to take, and you have, when you look at the business process automation component of this, you want to remove manual processes because manual processes create breaches. All right, you want to automate, and that's what Ian was kind enough to share with us. There's just so many opportunities to use great software to reduce or remove the need to print things, to share them with the wrong people, whatever it might be that might contain PI. And if you breach HIPAA, GDPR, you've got to report. And under GDPR, that's 72 hours. 72 hours you got to report to the supervisory authority. Start early in your planning. Privacy obligations are a functional requirement, they're a technical requirement, they're a governance requirement, and the list goes on the requirements. So they're as serious as user acceptance, they're as serious as functional needs to share information, whatever it might be for the software you're either purchasing or building. You need to start very early. If you start late, it's going to be a big disappointment. You're going to do a lot of rework. And then train your staff early and often, and really I'm going to back that up to a higher level and simply say, go Google the 7 steps to an effective compliance program. You'll have a nice list of 7 areas that will help you meet your privacy obligations. I tell that to my clients, and this is stuff that's been out there for literally decades. And so don't reinvent the wheel. The wheel has already been built and it's rolling. If you do HIPAA, you are doing GDPR for the most part. So don't reinvent the wheel. Use what you got. Ian, you wanted to pick up the last point, I believe.
Absolutely. And learn from your peers. I mean, there is so much information in the marketplace, and especially when considering implementing, deploying a new application, technology solution, it can become quite overwhelming. There's so much technology out there now, and it's only getting more clustered. So really take the time up front, consider what your current state is. Okay, so what are you trying to solve for? Take time to consider what you feel you're doing well today, what you feel you could potentially be doing differently, or maybe something you all of a sudden think of that you're not even doing at all. So with all that being said, there are systems, solutions, toolkits out there to help meet all of the unique requirements of organizations in getting exactly what you need and not something you don't.
And like see, Teresa, I think we're going to move toward number 14.
Yes, we are. And in with that last bullet point where it said learn from your peers, AccuSoft is making a white paper of theirs available to you, and it's in the link in the resources list to the right side of the slide area. It's one of the links over there. In addition, there's a couple other case studies that AccuSoft has made available for you, so there's some immediate resources right there. And Ian, I know this is a brand new paper that AccuSoft has just put out, and it's 7 ways to upgrade your enterprise content management system for 2018. I just wanted you to have a quick opportunity just to talk about this paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Teresa. Really, we continue the conversation around things to consider when you're going to either update or upgrade existing applications, and dive deeper into best practices, ways to really simplify. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. So we give you ideas and things to consider that really alleviate the pain of having to do a system upgrade or anything like that. And ultimately, just things to really, as I mentioned earlier, to think about that are often overlooked. Not for nothing, but it's a big endeavor. It's often a long process implementing any size of software, no matter big or small. So there are things that are going to be overlooked. So we really want you to take a step back prior to diving in and really assess the situation as it is currently and what you're hoping to accomplish by upgrading or implementing something new altogether. And so really the 7 ways, we really dive into the 7 ways to upgrade your enterprise content management system and kind of provide a roadmap on how to move forward.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
I know I glanced at the paper, real quickly when I was first posting it up there yesterday, and it looks to be a good read. So I encourage everybody to download that. And Ian, I just have some contact information up here for you right now.
Yep, I'd invite anyone and every. Yeah, I'd invite everyone and anyone on the call today. Please feel free to reach out to me directly. Send me a note, drop me a line, connect on LinkedIn. I'm happy to help further the conversation in any way possible.
Thanks. And we've been listening to Ian Carlson and also to Greg Reed. And I know we have a bit of time here to take some questions. And Greg, I just want to, because I'm going to jump right in here. And in the middle of your presentation, you were talking about the packages and for reducing the number of packages in the organization's infrastructure, and just looking for a clarification in what you meant by that.
Well, I mean, in a lot of things, and it's a really longer discussion. But what I've seen companies do, and Americans love this. Now, I'm an American, but we love to buy technology. We like to write a check and buy the latest, greatest type of technology, information management product. I've gone into clients and they got Box, they got Dropbox, they got Ignite, they got SharePoint, they got ShareFile, they got LiveLink, they've got Documentum, they got shared drives, of course, they got email, and then they wonder why we can't get our information under control. And that's my response is because you've got every package known to mankind. So when we talk about technology minimization, and I talk about this a lot, the fewer packages, the better, because it increases your security, it increases your ability to control the information, and it's not just a good idea anymore, everyone. It is a requirement under the privacy laws that we secure our information. And if we breach, we have got significant legal obligations under those breach regulations that we have to follow. So the more you minimize technology, you might get a little less functionality, but your ability to meet the needs of the end users and to keep your information secure and data subject information secure goes up exponentially, in my opinion. It's when you spread information all around every technology. And those are all good technologies I mentioned, but don't own them all. Own a set of them, and then use that specific small set to meet your business obligations.
Okay. Another question that has come in here, and someone asked, when it comes to security accountability, what are your thoughts on how to approach print governance? Meaning people who have, when it's a private confidential information, and if an employee is approved to have access to that information, just access rights, for printing or sharing. Can you talk a little bit about an approach or a best practice for managing print governance?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think the breaches occur mostly because of humans, not hackers, not technology flaws, but humans. So the best way to address any potential issue around print, or pretty much any potential issue around data security, is to train people well. Start with that. Start with your compliance program, again, the 7 steps of compliance and governance. Train people well. And then as an IT person, as a business operations person, looking at the technology that people use, ask the question, why do we need to print that? Okay, people like printing. I'm old. I like printing. I like to have it in front of me. But let's minimize the need to do that, because once it goes to physical copy, then we have another channel we can lose information. But training and policies and procedures are the first best method, in my opinion, to deal with data security. Then comes the technology and business processes.
Yeah, and Greg, that's a great point. In addition to that, there are tools out there to help with that. For example, our viewers allow you to programmatically allow or disallow by user authority. So, I mean, there are things you can put in place to prevent individuals from downloading sensitive information or any sort of document they shouldn't be.
And that's a good point. I think Ian brings up a good point. There's a technology enabler, there's a business process enabler, there's a governance enabler to making sure people do the right things with personal information. And I think there's not one solution to making that happen. It's really a convergence of these different channels to really keeping data secure. Thank you, Teresa. That's a good question.
Ian, I want to direct this next question over to you. And for the people who do have gaps in their current solutions, what would be some first steps or a next step approach to address that?
Well, that's a good question. You always have to start at the beginning, obviously. So, say there are gaps. What does it mean? What's the business problem? Is it causing a gap in terms of process? Is it an organizational inefficiency? Is it a gap within existing software applications? And then how to solve for it. There are toolkits out there that will serve as a bridge between, not being good enough in terms of existing functionality, or ultimately providing the user with functionality that didn't even exist natively. So some organizations may have a stronger need for form field detection. So perhaps you need to detect and generate fields into your documents and create a fillable web form of documents. Instead of having to buy a complete software package, you can look for things like toolkits and integrate into your existing application to provide you with that functionality. Instead of having to go out and buy a big, expensive enterprise software package, there are pieces out there to really solve for that.
Okay. Greg, someone just asked for a quick clarification, your recommendation to Google and find the, was it 7 steps for effective compliance? What was that again?
Yes. It's called the 7 steps for an effective compliance program. You can put OIG, Office of Inspector General, beside that, and a bunch of things are going to come up. And they're going to be user training, governance, and so on. There's 7 steps. And that is just a great template for following privacy compliance. It's not 100% perfect, but I guess my point is don't reinvent any of these wheels. These wheels, especially if you're trying to think about GDPR, HIPAA is the cousin to the GDPR, okay? The GDPR people came over and they grabbed a bunch of good stuff from HIPAA and they took it and put it into the GDPR. So if you're thinking of meeting obligations of the GDPR, go and look for HIPAA solutions, because HIPAA solutions are really good. They're very prescriptive, they're very detailed, and if you generally meet HIPAA, for the most part, you're going to meet the GDPR. You may not need to meet HIPAA because your industry may be the transportation industry, but HIPAA has a lot of great stuff. You can Google HIPAA and you can get thousands of good pieces of information on any component of a privacy program that you can use, steal, and implement within your own organization, even if it isn't a covered entity or business associate.
Do you have a question here? Crack out the crystal ball here, Greg. Where do you see the future of security, information security?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think the future of information security, it becomes less of a good idea. It becomes now part of our legal obligation. It's also reputational. We've seen some companies that do the security well and still got breached, and they're still held in high regard. We've seen others that haven't. And so really information security, you can't do privacy without information security. You can do information security without privacy, but you cannot do privacy, meet privacy obligations without information security capabilities. And privacy obligations are the law. Okay, we can say they're not important, whatever, but they are the law. And under the GDPR, we all know there's a lot of tens of millions of euros of fines if you flagrantly or negligently breach the GDPR. So it's not just a good idea anymore, it's a requirement. And the governments are now coming after companies, especially the FTC. We don't hear a lot about that. The Federal Trade Commission actively goes after companies when they flagrantly misuse their customers' data. And so information security is part of that, and that's an important, it's going to get more important as we move forward.
With GDPR, and as you say, it is a close cousin to HIPAA, do you see some sort of global standard coming regarding information security, data privacy?
No, I don't, because our governments, even the U.S. doesn't have a global or federal approach to privacy. The FTC is probably the closest federal approach, but we've got HIPAA, FERCRA, we've got the Massachusetts law, we've got California law, which is very heavy on breach and all that. So no, I don't see that. But I think what I see is that customers of software environments like Facebook, whatever it might be, are going to be demanding more from the companies, not only what they capture, but how they use that information. I mean, Cambridge Analytica is a perfect example of a flagrant misuse of personal data. And we've only begun to see people that are walking away from Facebook because of it. So I think the governments, being governments, don't always operate efficiently. But I think people's expectations of how companies use their data is only going to increase over time. And as a result of that, companies need to step up to a much more stringent approach of how they use data, their personal data of their customers, because they will be held accountable, either the court of justice or the court of public opinion. One or the other, or both, are going to come after them if they misuse data.
Okay. Well, I want to just move on to one other thing real briefly here, and just talk a little bit about that AIM has a new training course, and this is where you get to explore use cases for the cloud, robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, and blockchain in information management. And it's the emerging technologies in information management, and it's a new course that has just come out. And if you purchase this course as an online bundle between May 15th and May 31st, so till the end of this month, you can receive a $50 discount. And you would just use the promotion code TECH2018 to be able to get that discount. So visit aim.org/emerging-tech to learn more about this specific training program. And I know that we debuted part of this training material at the AIM conference and I know it was greatly received, and it's just something that I'm really looking forward to taking the classes myself. And so I just want to encourage you all to check out this new AIM training course. And, Greg, I mentioned at the very beginning that you are on AIM's board of directors, and just wanted to give you an opportunity just to mention one or two things about AIM before we get to the end of our webinar.
Oh, thank you, Teresa. So I've been a customer of AIM for about 20 years, been going to their conferences. I've been doing information management governance, that whole bolus of information management work for decades. Now I'm on the board of directors for AIM. And I'll tell you, you're not going to find more value for the money and the time than joining AIM. The training materials, their white papers, their communications, are written by true experts in a number of different areas. So for $160, $170 a year, whatever the professional membership is, and for a little bit of money for training, there's no better value out there in learning how to manage information than through AIM, period, because I've looked. So join AIM. It's well worth the $170 a year that you get access to all this great stuff. If you want to learn more about privacy, I highly recommend another group called the IAPP, International Association of Privacy Professionals. That's where I started my privacy journey before I went to law school, and to learn more about privacy. They are exceptional. It's IAPP.org. They will teach you about the GDPR. They'll teach you about privacy. They got great privacy programs. And so AIM and IAPP are kind of like cousins. And you won't get better value for your time or your money than by AIM will teach you how to manage information. IAPP will tell you what you need to do to meet the law. And together, that's a very powerful combination. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you. And you mentioned with GDPR resources, there's a whole lot on AIM's website about that, and also in AIM's online community. There is a discussion community devoted just to GDPR, and I know that they have weekly webinar-type sessions where they bring on different GDPR experts to talk about different facets of it and help you gear up to and the ongoing quest to stay in compliance. So there are a lot of resources on AIM's website related to GDPR.
Yes,
so even if you just go over there and in the search box, just type in GDPR, a lot will come up there, but also check over the community page as well. Well, we are getting to the end of our webinar time here. And just wanted to remind you that we have been recording this webinar, and I'll be posting it to the AIM.org's resources webinars page in just a day or two. But don't forget to download all of the resources we have available for you that's on your screen right now. Please take the survey. It'll pop up when the event is over with, but it's also in the widgets below. I greatly value your feedback. So please take that survey. Very much want to thank our underwriter, AccuSoft. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs. So thank you, AccuSoft, for your sponsorship and your participation today. And just as we do bring this webinar to a close, I just want to reach out to our speakers one last time for a key takeaway of things that we've been discussing today. And Ian Carlson from AccuSoft, if I can start with you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Teresa. It's been an absolute pleasure partnering with AIM. Final thoughts. When reflecting upon privacy and data protection obligations, both that you owe to your employees internally and to your customers, partners, vendors, really take the time to evaluate what is driving the need for your business. What type of regulations you're held to, what type of compliance issues you need to adhere to, and take the time to really learn about those. And when going through that process, don't just dive right into it, because you don't want to get down the road of implementing a solution and figure out that you missed something entirely. So it's just really important to take the time up front, because it always makes things easier in the end.
Thank you, Ian. And Greg Reed, your closing thought today?
Yeah, well, again, thank you, Teresa, and thank you, AccuSoft. As a member of the board of directors, we appreciate your support. Thank you very much for underwriting this. I find privacy to be an exceptionally interesting area. I've been doing information management in governments globally. I've lived in Sydney, I've lived in Singapore, I lived all over the UK, all over the United States. For many different clients, I was a partner with Accenture at one time, partner with Ernst & Young, doing this globally. And I'll tell you, information management and governance is always changing. Privacy adds a whole different dimension to information management and governance that make it even more exciting. So my recommendation is if you have a bug for information management and governance, look at some privacy stuff as well, because it really adds a lot of salt to that steak, and it drives home the importance of information management, good information governance from an organizational perspective. If there ever was a reason to do it well, it's because of privacy statutes and regulations. So that's my final thought on that.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. That's all we have with this webinar. I'll see you on our next one. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick. Have a good afternoon.